Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Jay Sekulow.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the broadcast, and we've got big news. Really significant. Of course, there's news on top of news. There has been a major victory in the United States District Court in California on what was an incredible challenge aimed at keeping the President of the United States off the ballot. And this was this requirement that the state of California passed that in essence, and this is what's so critical here, that in essence, understand this, put an additional requirement to the Constitution's what they call presidential qualification clause into law. But this requirement that tax returns be added, this is what they tried to do here. Now, I want you to understand this. If you don't disclose your tax returns, we're not allowing you on the ballot. That violated freedom of association, freedom of speech. It violated the Equal Protection Clause. It violated the Presidential Qualification Clause. A U.S. District Court last night, and the judge indicated this last week that it would be coming, but until you see the order, you never know. We got the written opinion. It is a significant constitutional victory. You're going to get a lesson in the Constitution in today's broadcast because we're going to get into this in great detail. But let me first say this. Again, what was at stake? It was an attempt to change the laws, to change the rules by the left, to add qualifications to running for president that are not in the Constitution itself. So understand what's at play when you do that. That's not in the Constitution itself, yet they were trying to change the laws and modify the rules for qualification to be on a ballot. You know what impact that would have in the United States? It would be really, frankly, unprecedented. Harry, how big of a win here? By the way, I will say, I think that if this is appealed, and I suspect it will be, we will win at the Ninth Circuit. If it ended up at the Supreme Court, we will win at the Supreme Court. Harry?
This is a tremendous victory because the statute at issue, the California statute, was transparently illegal and unconstitutional. And it was really aimed at only one person. California claimed that the release of one's tax returns was indeed customary. The judge looked at the facts, and since 1913 up until 1973, no sitting president had released his taxes to the public. So I think it is clear beyond question that California was attempting to change the rules in midstream, and they were attempting to change the rules in violation of the Constitution. So the judge quite correctly issued a preliminary injunction enjoining the enforcement of this particular statute. Of course, there will be appeals later.
Yeah, they say they may even do those appeals on an expedited basis. But let me tell you what's at play here. And this goes to other issues we're going to talk about today. Adam Schiff just now stated that if the White House doesn't comply with the subpoenas that they've issued and other individuals don't comply, State Department and others, that's obstruction as a basis, could be an abasement for an impeachment proceeding. You know what's interesting about that? Since when is following the constitutional mandates, because there are significant issues constitutionally raised by this, when is following constitutional obligations a basis for obstruction? It's absurd. It's weaponizing the Constitution. We don't allow that in the United States of America. We're taking a break. When we come back, we'll take your calls. 1-800-684-3110. Your reaction to this win, your reaction to the latest attempt to weaponize the Constitution and to turn it into basically a document that if you follow what it says, I just made a statement that arguing that following the constitutional mandates is obstruction and absurd. Read Article 2. That's what they need to be doing. Back with more in just a moment.
The left is criminalizing the execution of the U.S. Constitution. The deep state is undermining the rule of law and the conservative agenda. This is a constitutional moment for the American people. Nearly every day there is a new leak, a new fake accusation, a new attempt to stop the president from doing his job, a new attempt to push the same false narrative on the American people. What we're seeing today is without a doubt the shredding of the U.S. Constitution. At the ACLJ, we've spent the better part of 3 decades defending the Constitution. We're taking direct action to fight back, to restore the Constitution. We're in court battling the deep state in numerous cases, reanalyzing the law, and we're working on Capitol Hill to ensure that the law is followed. We will restore the Constitution and root out corruption. But we need you. Stand with the ACLJ now. Add your name to our petition to restore the Constitution. Online, aclj.org.
If you're just joining us, we have an opinion entered yesterday. U.S. District Judge Morrison, England. The case is Griffin versus Padilla. What it really is a case, also the case of Donald J. Trump for president and Donald J. Trump in his capacity as private citizen versus Padilla. The case involves a challenge to a law put in place in California. I want you to hear what this is. That added a requirement to the Constitution, to Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5, which is the qualification clause. It says this: no person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of president. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained the age of 35 years and been 14 years a resident within the United States. There it is. Clear as can be. Those are the qualifications for president to run for president. How clear could it be? Yet California says, well, no, to appear on the ballot, though, we want to add a little different requirement. You got to release your tax returns, which, by the way, think about this. There weren't even federal income taxes at the time of the adoption of the Constitution. I mean, how about that? I mean, at the level of what this is all of this is absurd. They're making up rules at the end of the game here, Harry.
Absolutely. And as the judge correctly points out, if California gets its way, what prevents another state from demanding the president's health records or his birth certificate or his high school diploma or his college transcript as a predicate for running for office? The Constitution is quite clear, quite simple, quite straightforward. Yes. And President Trump meets the constitutional requirements for running for president of the United States. Everyone knows the president is over the age of 35. He is indeed a natural-born citizen. And it is clear as day that he can run for president constitutionally. Yes. And so what we have here is a transparent attempt by the left to rewrite the United States Constitution. Why? Because they dislike this particular president and they suffer from what might be called the Trump derangement syndrome.
Let me get a quote from the judge. It is not the job of the courts, however, to decide whether a tax return disclosure requirement is good policy or makes political sense. Those are questions delegated to the political branches of the federal government. That is Congress and the president, because if there was a law passed, the president could sign it. Or he could veto it. Under Articles 1 and Article 2 of the United States Constitution, those are the branches that make the law. Courts created under Article 3, this is a lesson for Adam Schiff, by the way, and Nancy Pelosi and Jerry Nadler. They need to be listening to this as well. Courts created under Article 3 of the United States Constitution are not concerned with political victories or who may or may not win. Instead, it is the court's job to make sure the Constitution wins. The victory here last night was for all of us in our constitutional republic. It was a victory. It is a victory for the Constitution. That is what it's play here. But I will tell you this. I'm going to Van Bennett, our Director of Governmental Affairs. I'm watching these press conferences as this news is all breaking, and they're saying, Adam Schiff just said we should get this bite, that the White House not responding to their subpoenas is obstruction, and that could be a count for impeachment. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. There are serious constitutional issues raised, including executive privilege and others, raised by these subpoenas. And do you not think that we, as the president's counsel or the White House, as the White House counsel to the office of the presidency or the Department of Justice, have a legitimate interest in making sure there's not a waiver of privilege or violation of constitutional requirements and mandates? So they're weaponizing the Constitution. If you exercise executive privilege of the Constitution, that's a violation. That is absurd. It is dangerous to the republic. But you know what's happening here. Van, I'm going to go to you in a second here. Let me take you through this in a really quick timeline. There is a so-called whistleblower complaint, right? Who has primarily no firsthand knowledge. Most of the information in the report's not firsthand knowledge. You got the whole, hearsay thing. And then there's some supportedly that is, but it appears this individual is not on a call, which is the whole gravamen of this whole issue. So first it was quid pro quo. Then wait a minute, there's no quid pro quo because the transcript was released. Oh, it's not then it was the president's putting pressure on the government, but there's no quid pro quo. Then it's the cover-up. And then I say to myself, cover-up? We released the transcript. So what exactly are you covering up? Okay, then it goes to now what is it? Stonewalling. So they're already going off of the document itself. They don't want to stick to the four corners of the document. Then they are moving into the land of, if you don't do what we say, you're obstructing.
Well, that's really the tie here, Jay. I mean, this is just the latest in a long string of attempts to do anything they can to overturn, I would tell you, the will of the people. Of course, the president was the winner in the ruling last night, but so were the American people. Jay, first of all, I think it's so refreshing to see a judge stay within the bounds of the power granted to them by Article 3 of the Constitution and deferring to the Article 1 and Article 2 branches and the authority the Constitution gives them. Jay, the American people spoke, and this was an effort to undermine them. Yep. And I would tell you this, on the question of subpoenas and depositions, Jay, another thing that was refreshing to me, how about Secretary Pompeo saying, look, those documents do not belong to my employees. Leave them alone. Come to me. I will respond to your queries in an appropriate fashion, but leave my employees alone.
Yeah, I want to play for you what Adam Schiff said because this ties exactly into this California case. They're trying to change all the rules. Understand what's at play here. They are trying to change all of the rules that are in place on these issues. So how do you respond to that? We go to court. And guess what, Adam Schiff? Breaking news alert. If we think something's unconstitutional or violates executive privilege, we will challenge it. If the conclusion of Rudy's lawyer, in consultation with other lawyers, is that there is attorney-client information contained in the documents you're requesting, guess what? You say you don't recognize attorney-client privilege. I'll tell you what we say. We will go to court to defend attorney-client privilege if necessary. Same thing on executive privilege, if necessary. I can't speak for the White House on that. But if it was a constitutional issue that relates to my area, that's exactly what we would do. But I'm going to tell you something. Understand what's at play here. Listen to what Representative Schiff actually said. Here it is.
We are concerned that the White House will attempt to stonewall our investigation, much as they have stonewalled other committees in the past. It's why I say the White House needs to understand that any action like that, that forces us to litigate or have to consider litigation, will be considered further evidence of obstruction of justice.
There you have it. So let me break this down. We are concerned that the White House will attempt to stonewall our investigation. I'm going to go to Harry on this. Stonewall the investigation. You get a question. You get a subpoena. It may cover executive privilege. If the White House decides it's protected by executive privilege, how does that stonewall their investigation? It's just simply complying with constitutional norms and mandates.
Absolutely. And so House Speaker Pelosi suggested at today's news conference that there are three co-equal branches of government. And so it is clear beyond question, pursuant to the Constitution, that the legislative branch does not have an unlimited right to investigate the executive branch. But Adam Schiff, nonetheless, believes that he has an unlimited right to investigate the president, and if the president seeks to exercise his constitutional authority within the meaning of the Constitution, then according to Adam Schiff, this constitutes stonewalling. We all know that Adam Schiff's analysis, properly understood, constitutes nothing more than nonsense. He is trying to rewrite the Constitution just like the California state government attempted to rewrite the Constitution with respect to the qualifications for president. And so all American people should be alarmed at the left's attempt to rewrite the Constitution and to effectively criminalize the exercise of constitutional authority within the meaning of the Constitution. So this cannot stand, and all of the American people who are impartial should rise up and oppose this effort.
So here's an interesting quote. I'm going to read right from the opinion here because I think this sets the tone for what we're dealing with. At base, the act, talking about this presidential so-called Transparency Act, which is now struck as unconstitutional, by the way, the act seeks to punish a class of candidates who elect not to comply with disclosing their tax returns by handicapping their access to the electoral process. This is plainly impermissible. So how could it be any different? Ask yourself that. How could that be okay? And the answer is it can't be okay. It is a republic. That's what that's the Ben Franklin quote. If you can keep it. What they tried to do in California was not allow us to keep it, but guess what? We won. Support the work of the ACLJ at aclj.org. Back with more in just a moment.
The left is criminalizing the execution of the U.S. Constitution. The deep state is undermining the rule of law and the conservative agenda. This is a constitutional moment for the American people. Nearly every day there is a new leak, a new fake accusation, a new attempt to stop the president from doing his job, a new attempt to push the same false narrative on the American people. What we're seeing today is without a doubt the shredding of the U.S. Constitution. At the ACLJ, we've spent the better part of 3 decades defending the Constitution. We're taking direct action to fight back, to restore the Constitution. We're in court battling the deep state in numerous cases. We're analyzing the law, and we're working on Capitol Hill to ensure that the law is followed. We will restore the Constitution and root out corruption. But we need you. Stand with the ACLJ now. Add your name to our petition to restore the Constitution. Online, aclj.org.
Let me tell you what's at stake. You look at this California opinion, huge win for the Constitution. Huge win for the American people on ballot access. I mean, very, very significant. But then Adam Schiff makes this statement that if you don't do what we say, Mr. President, if your White House doesn't do what we say, Mr. President, Mr. Giuliani, if you don't do what we say, that's in grounds for impeachment. As if the attorney-client privilege does not exist. And by the way, they put that out there, that the Congress doesn't recognize attorney-client privilege. Really? Well, let me tell you, go test that one in court. So you understand what this is. I mean, you understand what's at play with all of this. But I want to give you a reality as to where we are right now. I'm going to take calls at 800-684-3110. We're going to respond to all this. 800-684-3110. Jerry's calling from Rhode Island. Jerry, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hello, team.
Yep.
Jay, how come some of these frivolous arguments that clearly don't have a foundation and you know you're going to win, how come they get past the front gate of the court, causing us taxpayers to have to pay for it, or the defendant having to pay to go argue a frivolous case?
Well, we had to look. I mean, Jerry, in this one, we had to file a lawsuit. The only way to win the case in California was to go to federal court. Now, if we also, and I'll tie it right into the subpoena issue here, if we believe that the subpoena request violates attorney-client privilege or executive privilege, that has to be evaluated and determination be made whether that will then be challenged in court. And that is the process upon which this goes. That is the process upon which this should go if we are dealing with the issues like this, which we are. And we're not going to just waive constitutional privileges, Harry, because that sets a horrible besides President Trump, it sets a terrible precedent for future presidents as well. There's a lot of institutional interest at stake here, and you can't be bullied and intimidated by these congressmen.
Jay, you're absolutely right. If we allow Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi to investigate without limits This then means that the executive branch's power will crumble in the face of legislative demands. And it's important to keep in mind that those demands, basically at the very moment we speak, are virtually unlimited. Virtually every single cabinet officer, every member of the executive branch, according to Adam Schiff, must now testify and give testimony or be deposed.
Yep.
This arguably constrains the president's Article 2 powers within the meaning of the Constitution. So Nancy Pelosi has gotten on her high horse today and proclaimed her love for the Constitution.
These issues that are being raised cover both every hat I wear, whether it's as counsel of the president or the ACLJ. I mean, these are core constitutional issues, and this was a core constitutional issue that we literally dealt with just in California. The decision just came out yesterday. It is a core constitutional issue that we're dealing with right now on air. These are big issues, and I want to say something on this because I think it's important for everybody to understand. We have to be prepared to defend the integrity of the Constitution from an onslaught that is taking place right now. And Than, you worked on Capitol Hill for a long time, but I will tell you, I've been around this for 40 years. I've never seen anything like I'm seeing right now with the threats and the intimidation. And if you don't do it our way, if you don't waive your privileges, if Rudy Giuliani doesn't disclose attorney-client information, it could be contempt, and we're going to arrest the attorney general. I mean, this is beyond absurd.
It's beyond absurd, Jay, and two things. One, I think the American people have to be prepared for this to move quickly as well because it's unraveling, but I don't think House Democrats will walk away from it. Instead, I think they will accelerate it, so people have to be prepared to move quickly on it. Secondly, I would say this to Carl, Jay. I mean, we try very hard to educate people on these constitutional provisions, separations of power, and all the rest. All we can do is put it out there, though, Jay, as well as do the work. We need people to actually listen, to hear the truth, and then to stand with us in educating themselves because ultimately, Jay, these federal officials, whether they're part of the executive branch or the legislative branch, they're coming back to the American people to validate what they've done, constitutional or otherwise. So we need people like Carl to stand with us, get educated, and then take appropriate action.
I mean, here's the thing. This is an intimidation tactic coming from those that want to undercut the Constitution. That's my view, number one. Number two, let me say this. We have out an ACLJ email right now that goes into this. We talk about this. We've got a brand new petition up at aclj.org that you need to sign. And the first line of it says the left is criminalizing the execution of the Constitution. I believe that's exactly the case. That was exactly what was going on in California. That is exactly what's going on when they say, no, what you can't assert attorney-client privilege. No, we don't care about executive privilege. No, we don't care about doctrines undercutting whether they have the authority to exercise their jurisdiction under their provisions of the Constitution without forming the committees appropriately. You realize there is no formal impeachment investigation going on. This inquiry is this half step. It's a political theater to appease their base. The big press announcement today was mostly, can we get the president to mandate that he violate his oath of office? Why do I say that? Because they're saying, oh, you don't need to look at the Constitution. You don't need to look at these requirements. We haven't got into the fact that the president was perfectly within his rights in that entire letter. We've been talking about that for a week. But you notice what they're not talking about today? The letter. I say the letter, the transcript. Notice the transcript's not a big part of the conversation. No quid pro quo anymore. None of that. What is it now? And then what's cover up? Well, it's not that. Now what is it? If you don't give us the information, you're obstructing justice. And they tell that to my colleague who is a lawyer for the president. As if attorney-client privilege doesn't exist, because in their view it doesn't. Guess what? It does. Support the work of the ACLJ. You could do that at aclj.org. Sign up for our Facebook feeds, Twitter, Periscope. Very, very important. aclj.org. That's aclj.org.
The left is criminalizing the execution of the U.S. Constitution. The deep state is undermining the rule of law and the conservative agenda. This is a constitutional moment for the American people. Nearly every day there is a new leak, a new fake accusation, a new attempt to stop the president from doing his job, a new attempt to push the same false narrative on the American people. What we're seeing today is without a doubt the shredding of the U.S. Constitution. At the ACLJ, we've spent the better part of 3 decades defending the Constitution. We're taking direct action to fight back, to restore the Constitution. We're in court battling the deep state in numerous cases. We're analyzing the law, and we're working on Capitol Hill to ensure that the law is followed. We will restore the Constitution and root out corruption. But we need you. Stand with the ACLJ now. Add your name to our petition to restore the Constitution. Online, aclj.org.